There comes a moment on the path of awakening that no one prepares you for. It is not radiant. It is not triumphant. It is silent, like stepping into a room where the music has stopped and you're the only one left dancing. After the initial flash of clarity, the spiritual insight that pierced through illusion, you expected your soul to soar, but instead something inside you grew quiet. The fire you thought would burn brighter began to dim, and in that stillness, a strange kind of emptiness took root. Not dramatic, not loud, but heavy, like the weight of a truth you don't yet know how to carry. You thought enlightenment would fill you with purpose. But what arrived instead was fog, a withdrawal from life's noise, a fading of your once-driven self. You wake up, but instead of feeling alive, you feel disconnected. The world continues spinning, yet you stand still inside it. This is the point where most begin to question if something has gone terribly wrong. Carl Jung foresaw this quiet crisis long before it became a spiritual cliché. He knew that when the unconscious is stirred, the ego begins to tremble. The identity you wore like armor begins to loosen, and without it, you feel exposed, not just to the world but to yourself. The very things that once gave your life meaning, ambition, achievement, recognition, suddenly feel hollow. You no longer crave what once drove you, but you also don't yet know what will take its place. This is not failure. It is a sacred turning, a psychic pause that signals the death of the false self, the persona built from adaptation and approval. What you are experiencing is not depression in the clinical sense, but a deeper kind of stillness, one that arises when the soul begins reclaiming authority over the ego. It is a threshold, not a breakdown. And yes, it's terrifying to feel your sense of purpose dissolve without a clear direction to replace it. However, as Jung taught, this collapse is not the end. It is the beginning of individuation, the long and inward journey toward becoming whole. You did not lose your way. You crossed into sacred territory, into the unknown part of yourself that has always waited patiently behind the performance. This quiet phase is not an error in your awakening. It is the doorway into its truth. And if you stay with it, if you let it do its work, you may find that the emptiness you fear is actually the womb of something real, something soul-led, something that no longer burns to impress, but burns to express. You are not lost. You are becoming. It often begins with a quiet unraveling. You wake up one day, stare at the same desk, the same inbox, the same list of tasks, and feel absolutely nothing. No fire, no urgency, no pull. What once defined your purpose, climbing the ladder, hitting goals, building your reputation, now feels like an echo from another life. But nothing external has changed. You still have the title, the calendar, the role, yet inside, the structure is collapsing, and you don't know how to explain why. Carl Jung called this structure the persona, the mask we learn to wear to survive, to belong, to succeed. It is not fake in the malicious sense. It is adaptive. It forms in childhood when we realize certain behaviors are rewarded, others rejected. So we shape ourselves to be lovable, competent, agreeable, and driven. And slowly, without realizing it, we become the role more than the soul. We become the version of ourselves that earns applause. The parent, the provider, the achiever, the spiritual seeker. However, the persona, while functional, is not foundational. It is not the self. It is a social agreement stitched from survival and strategy. When awakening strikes, often through crisis, loss, or deep introspection, it doesn't just give you insight. It strips the mask. And when the mask falls, so does everything built upon it. The dreams you chased, the image you crafted, the purpose you clung to like a lifeboat. You look around and realize that the life you built was designed by someone you no longer are. That realization hits like grief, and it is grief. You are mourning the death of an identity that once gave you direction, but it was never the whole truth. It was a chapter, not your essence. Take Sarah, a woman in her early 40s. For years, she was the model of success. corner office, perfectly curated social life, fit body, spiritual bookshelf lined with all the right names. She meditated every morning. She did the gratitude lists. She checked every box. Then one day, she couldn't get out of bed. Not from emptiness, but from emptiness. Her therapist said she might be burned out, but when she spoke, it wasn't exhaustion that came through, it was disillusionment. She said, "I feel like I've spent my life climbing a mountain only to realize it was the wrong one, and I don't even know who I was doing it for." This is the moment Jung warned us about. The moment the persona dissolves and the true self begins to stir, not with grand visions, but with unsettling silence. Your ego doesn't know what to do when its fuel source dries up. The applause stops mattering, the future loses its shape. Motivation evaporates, not because you are weak, but because the role you were playing no longer fits. You didn't lose your passion. You simply outgrew the illusion that passion must serve productivity. You finally see the gam, and once you see it, you can no longer unsee it. In Jung's language, this is the beginning of individuation, the sacred process of becoming whole. But before you can build a life rooted in authenticity, the architecture of the false self must crumble. This is not a punishment. It is a passage. Like an actor stepping off stage after decades in costume, you are now standing in the wings, barefaced, asking the most frightening question of all. If I am not the role I've played, who am I? And this is where courage is born, not the kind that charges forward, but the kind that stands still, in the rubble of what once made sense, and dares to feel the emptiness. Because in that emptiness, something ancient begins to awaken. Not a new identity, but a deeper truth. A truth that cannot be hustled, cannot be posted, cannot be measured by metrics or milestones. It is the quiet knowing that you are more than the mask, more than the narrative, more than the applause. The persona shatters, not to leave you empty, but to invite you into fullness. A fullness that does not need to be seen to be real. A fullness that speaks not in ambition, but in alignment. You are not broken, you are shedding, and the life that emerges on the other side is not smaller, but truer. This is not the death of your dreams, it is the death of the dream that was never really yours. There is a strange and silent terrain that no one warns you about. It arrives, not with thunder, but with the soft crumbling of identity. After the mask has fallen and the roles have dissolved, you do not immediately feel liberated. Instead, you find yourself standing in a liminal space, where everything familiar has vanished and nothing new has taken its place. This is the in-between, the psychic hallway between stories. You are no longer who you were, but not yet who you are becoming, and that in-between is not a quick detour, it is a season of the soul. In Jungian language, this is the threshold of transformation, the psychic chrysalis. Much like the caterpillar turns to formless liquid before becoming a butterfly, your sense of self must dissolve before it can be reconstructed around something real. But this dissolution is deeply uncomfortable. You try to explain it to others, but they don't understand. You say you feel lost, directionless, strangely numb. You say you wake up and feel as though the days are passing, but you are not really in them. You're observing your life from a distance, like a ghost haunting your own routine. To the world, everything looks the same. You go to work, you smile at the checkout line, you answer emails, but inside you feel like a blank page, and that blankness terrifies you. Because the old self, even in its stress and striving, had clarity. You knew the rules. You knew what success looked like, even if it left you empty. But now, there is no rulebook, no familiar rhythm, only stillness. And that stillness can feel like death. Take Daniel, a father in his late 30s. For years, he lived by the metrics of success. He built a company, raised a family, and volunteered on weekends. But after a health scare and a spiritual retreat that cracked him open, he came back changed. He could no longer force himself into the mold. The goals no longer made sense. The conversations felt hollow. He stopped pretending. But as he let go of the old, the new didn't arrive. "I feel like I'm floating," he said. like I'm untethered from everything and I can't go back, but I also don't know how to go forward. Jung understood this psychological suspension. He taught that in order for the self, the true inner center, to emerge, the ego must surrender its dominance. But in that surrender, there is disorientation. The ego screams for something to grab onto. It wants clarity, identity, and momentum. But none come. This stage is not for movement, it is for metamorphosis. And metamorphosis cannot be rushed. This is the womb of becoming, and like any birth, it is both sacred and painful. In this space, time stretches. Old habits fall away, old relationships feel foreign, and the silence becomes so loud you start questioning everything. You wonder if you made a mistake, if something broke inside you. But Jung would say that nothing broke. Something ancient was awakened, and now it is rearranging you from the inside out. Here, motivation does not return in grand gestures. It comes in flickers, a pull toward nature, a sudden desire to journal, a dream that lingers in the morning light. These are not distractions. They are soul whispers, clues, invitations. The self is not a voice that shouts. It is a pulse that deepens. And to hear it, you must become quiet enough inside to feel the subtle stirrings. The in-between is not failure. It is preparation. You are being emptied of false identities so that you can become a vessel for something truer, and though it feels like nothing is happening, everything is. The psyche is shedding its borrowed costumes, the soul is reclaiming its place. And your life, though still quiet, is no longer being shaped from the outside in. It is beginning to rise from within. So, if you find yourself stuck, floating between what was and what has yet to be, do not panic, do not rush. This is not your ending, it is your passage. The fog is not a sign that you are lost. It is a sign you are in transit. The self is coming, slowly, quietly, like dawn breaking after a long night. Let it come. Let yourself become. There is a moment after awakening when everything inside you, once blazing with ambition and momentum, slows to a whisper. You feel yourself swinging from constant overdrive into a deep and disorienting stillness. At first, it feels like burnout. But soon you realize it is something else, something quieter, deeper, and strangely sacred. You are no longer operating on the fuel of pressure, deadlines, or the need to be seen. You are suspended in a space where urgency evaporates and the impulse to prove dissolves. The world around you keeps spinning, but your soul refuses to move. Carl Jung named this phenomenon enantiodromia, the psyche's natural law of reversal. After long periods of leaning into one extreme, the soul swings into its opposite. When you've spent years achieving, planning, pushing through exhaustion, and measuring your worth through productivity, the pendulum eventually swings back. And when it does not ask for your permission. It simply pulls you into stillness. What you once called drive now feels hollow. What once gave you identity now feels heavy. You move from, I have to do everything, to, why do anything at all? To those around you, this may look like apathy. They may not understand your silence or your withdrawal. But what they see as laziness is actually the soul recalibrating its energy. You are not giving up, you are being emptied. And not in despair, but in preparation. The mind that was once overloaded with to-do lists and inner criticism is now being stripped down to its core. And beneath the noise, a different kind of intelligence is beginning to awaken. Consider David, a 50-year-old executive who spent 3 decades building his empire. Every hour of his day was accounted for. From early morning workouts to late-night meetings, he was praised for his hustle. But after a near-death experience from a sudden illness, something cracked open inside him. The old rhythm no longer made sense. He began cancelling meetings, forgetting appointments, and losing interest in everything he once found thrilling. Friends thought he was depressed. He thought he might be broken, but in truth, he was in the sacred swing. The psyche had flipped from external conquest to internal inquiry. Jung believed this reversal was not dysfunction, but wisdom. The soul seeks balance, and when the ego dominates for too long, forcing the body, mind, and heart into constant striving, the unconscious rises to restore equilibrium. It is a silent revolt. The self says enough. Enough chasing, enough pretending, enough running from the stillness. The pendulum must swing back, not as punishment, but as healing. In this stillness, life asks you to sit with what you've avoided. It brings you face to face with emotions that were buried under achievement. It invites you to listen to the voice you drowned out with busyness. And though this space can feel void of meaning, it is where your essence begins to surface, for it is in stillness, not motion, that the soul remembers its shape. But be warned, the ego will protest. It will label your stillness as laziness, your rest as regression. It will push you to get back on track to the life that was slowly numbing you. The ego cannot understand sacred rest because it only values what is seen and measured. Yet the self works in the unseen. It moves like roots underground, building something lasting long before it breaks the surface. Eventually, a quiet rhythm returns, but it is not a return to the old self. It is the emergence of something wiser. You begin to feel not compelled, but called. Not driven, but drawn. Your energy does not rise through anxiety, but through resonance. You act not to prove, but to align. This is not a step backward, it is a homecoming, and though the swing into stillness feels disorienting, it is what allows you to live again, not as a performer in life's race, but as a participant in its truth. So if you feel the pendulum has swung too far into silence, trust it. You are not stuck, you are being rebalanced. The sacred stillness is not where your fire dies, it is where your deeper flame begins to kindle. In the quiet aftermath of awakening, when the momentum fades and the silence stretches longer than you expected, a deep heaviness may settle in. You begin to wonder if you are depressed. You Google symptoms. You replay your choices. You ask yourself, why does everything feel so flat, so meaningless? Friends might suggest you're just burned out and need a vacation. A well-meaning voice might say, snap out of it. But nothing seems to reach the root of what you're feeling. That's because what you're experiencing isn't just psychological exhaustion, it's soul-deep reorientation. Carl Jung would not have called it burnout. He would have called it a summons. A sacred descent. A moment where the unconscious rises not to torment you, but to speak. This is the place where the shadow begins to stir. The parts of you that were exiled in your pursuit of success, approval, and performance. The stillness that now surrounds you is not a void. It is a container, one spacious enough to hold everything you've been running from. When the ego collapses and the old fuel runs dry, the psyche slows down, deliberately, not to punish you, but to protect you. It softens the edges of your outer life so that the inner life can finally be heard. In truth, much of what we call motivation is often a distraction. It keeps us busy enough to never ask the deeper question. Why am I really here? Whose life am I living? What pain am I carrying that I haven't named? Take Julia, a teacher and mother in her 40s. For years, she balanced everything with precision, raising 2 kids, managing a full-time job, attending church, and helping her aging parents. She never stopped. Until one morning, she woke up and couldn't get out of bed. She felt paralyzed, not from laziness, but from something unnamed. She cried without knowing why. She cancelled meetings. She stared out the window for hours. The world called it depression. But what was surfacing in Julia wasn't pathology. It was grief. Not over one event, but over a lifetime of self-abandonment. The stillness made it impossible to escape the truth any longer. Jung taught that healing often begins with descent, not ascent into light, but descent into the forgotten. The stillness you are feeling now is not dysfunction, it is initiation. Your psyche is peeling back layers that no longer serve. The emotional numbness is not the absence of feeling, but the pause before feeling fully returns. The confusion is not failure. It is the fog that forms when one world ends and the next has not yet begun. This sacred pause is the psyche's way of saying, slow down, look, listen. You are carrying too much. You are living on patterns that were never truly yours. And now, the real work begins. Not the kind that impresses the world, but the kind that brings you home to yourself. You may feel like you're falling apart, but what's actually happening is the disintegration of false structure. The facade is crumbling so the foundation can be reclaimed. In the depth of stillness, your shadow begins to take form. You may start to remember the part of you that stopped trusting people, the child who had to be strong too soon, the artist you silenced, the anger you buried beneath politeness. All of it comes forward not to destroy you, but to be reintegrated, to be met with compassion. Jung believed that we are not made whole by being perfect. We are made whole by embracing what we've exiled. This is the work the soul asks for. Not another goal, not another mask, but a return to truth. And truth begins in silence. It moves slowly. It trembles before it roars. And in that trembling, you begin to reclaim your own voice. Not the voice the world taught you to use, but the one that has waited beneath the noise your entire life. So no, you are not broken. You are not failing. You are being pulled inward for a reason. You are being asked to retrieve what you left behind in the name of fitting in. And this work, though invisible to others, is the most sacred labor of all. When you honor it, your life will not just resume, it will be reborn, not driven by pressure, but shaped by presence. One morning, without warning or drama, you feel something stir. It is not a burst of ambition or a jolt of urgency. It does not arrive like your old motivation did, dressed in pressure, deadlines, or the need to prove something. Instead, it whispers. It hums quietly in the background, soft but unmistakable. You feel drawn, not pushed. You feel called, not chased. This is not the old engine of ego-driven striving coming back to life. This is the first sign that your true energy is beginning to return, not for performance, but for presence. Carl Jung understood that when the ego collapses, something deeper begins to grow in its place. But unlike the ego, which is fueled by fear of insignificance, the self does not operate on adrenaline. It does not need applause. The self is slow, deliberate, and profoundly honest. It does not move because it should. It moves when something resonates, and when it moves with meaning. After the silence, the stillness, and the shadow work, this return of motivation can feel almost strange. You expect the fire to roar, but instead it flickers. You expect a blueprint, but instead you are handed a feeling, a nudge, a quiet inner yes. And though it may feel small at first, this is no less sacred. It is your soul's way of saying, I am ready to re-enter the world, but this time on my own terms. Take Melissa, a graphic designer who had spent 20 years building brands and climbing the corporate ladder. After a personal collapse triggered by divorce and illness, she could no longer bring herself to open her laptop. The work felt meaningless. Her spark vanished. Months passed in silence. Then one afternoon she found herself sketching again. Not for a client, but for herself. Flowers, symbols, dreams. She lost track of time. Something flowed through her, not for money, not for praise, but for joy. That night, she cried, not because she was sad, but because for the first time in years, she felt alive, doing something that didn't require external validation. This is what Jung called the emergence of the self. It begins when we act not from who we're supposed to be, but from who we truly are. This motivation does not arise from fear of falling behind. It rises from the clarity of alignment. You begin to ask different questions, not what should I be doing right now, but what feels quietly true. Not how do I get ahead, but what brings me back to myself. In these questions, the ego has no power, only the soul responds. The new motivation does not always lead to grand gestures. Sometimes it leads you to plant a garden, to write poetry, to say no to something that once defined you, to walk away from noise, even when silence still feels unfamiliar. But every act, no matter how small, feels infused with something real, something that feels like home. And the irony is, when you no longer seek to prove your worth, your energy becomes magnetic. You are no longer working against yourself. You are no longer dragging a persona into battle every day. Instead, you become the kind of person who creates, teaches, heals, and leads, not because you must, but because your whole being says yes. Not because the world demands it, but because your soul is overflowing and needs somewhere to pour. This is soul-led momentum. It does not move in straight lines or upward grafts. It moves like a river, finding its own way. It cannot be faked. It cannot be forced. But when it arrives, it feels like truth in motion. So if you are waiting for the old fire to return, stop. That fire burned everything it was meant to. What is coming alive now is different, softer, wiser, slower. This is not the beginning of another race. It is the beginning of a more honest rhythm. Your new fuel is not performance. It is present. At some point, the performance no longer feels sustainable. The carefully managed image, the polished conversations, the pursuit of being seen as good, right, accomplished, it all begins to unravel, not from failure, but from awakening. You realize that the mask you've worn for decades, the one that helped you belong and succeed, no longer feels like home. It fits your face, but not your spirit. The more you try to maintain it, the more it drains you. And then something deeper inside whispers a radical truth. I want to live without hiding. Carl Jung called this process living symbolically. It is the art of living not from the outer shell, but from the inner world. From instincts rather than image. From inner truth rather than social approval. It does not mean abandoning logic, responsibility, or ambition. It means no longer betraying yourself in order to meet them. It means choosing honesty over impression, depth over decoration. In symbolic living, the soul becomes the compass. Dreams are not random flickers of the mind. They are coded messages from the unconscious. Your body's tension, your sudden resistance to a task, the ache you feel in someone's presence, these are not inconveniences. They are communicating. The self, when given space, speaks not through arguments, but through resonance. A conversation that lingers, a book you cannot put down, a silence that feels alive. These are symbols pointing you inward. Consider Michael, a retired army officer who had lived most of his life by discipline and duty. He lived by order, lists, and expectations. But after leaving the military, he found himself lost in civilian life. He tried to recreate structure, applied for high-level jobs, and kept busy. Yet something felt hollow. Then one night he dreamt of a child locked in a basement. He woke up with tears in his eyes. The dream stayed with him. He brought it to therapy. Over time he realized that the child was a younger version of himself, tender, creative, and silenced. That dream led him to begin painting, something he had not done since childhood. He now spends hours a week in his garage studio, not for achievement, but for connection. The man who once lived by war now lives by color. Not because it makes sense to the world, but because it finally makes sense to him. This is what Jung meant by the symbolic life. It is not a rejection of reality, but a re-enchantment of it. It is when you begin to trust your subtle signals more than your social scripts, when you sense that what glitters may not nourish you, and what feels quiet may hold gold. Your choices no longer come from fear of missing out, but from an intuitive knowing that only you can feel. You do not seek clarity in the opinions of others. You seek congruence in your own breath. As the soul takes the lead, life no longer feels like a performance. You no longer walk into rooms wondering who you need to be. You enter as you are, knowing that authenticity is not loud, but grounded. You do not chase what looks impressive. You create what feels alive. You begin to notice that even simple things, a walk in nature, an unexpected conversation, a dream journal by your bed, carry more weight than external achievements ever did. Letting the soul lead means honoring what feels right before asking what looks right. It means allowing your intuition to challenge your logic, your dreams to disrupt your plans, and your body to guide your boundaries. And when you live this way, your life may not look extraordinary on paper, but it will feel real in your bones. This shift is subtle but seismic. It is the difference between chasing approval and choosing alignment, between controlling your image and connecting to your essence. You are no longer living your life. You are inhabiting it. Fully. Symbolically. Soulfully. So if you feel called to step away from what is expected and step toward what is honest, trust that call. It is not rebellion. It is a return. Not to chaos, but to coherence. Not to ego, but to essence. Let the mask fall and let what's underneath finally breathe. There comes a point on this inner journey where you stop trying to revive the life that once defined you. The masks have been set down. The performance has grown quiet. And in the stillness, something new begins to breathe. You realize the ego didn't die to punish you. It died to make space for something more whole, more honest. The death of the false self is not a loss. It is a release. A sacred undoing of everything that was never truly yours. Carl Jung taught that individuation, the process of becoming your true self, begins not with answers, but with surrender. Surrender to the mystery, the silence, the inner dismantling. What follows is not clarity in the way the world defines it, but coherence. You no longer feel scattered. You are not pulled in 1,000 directions trying to prove your value. Instead, you feel anchored in something steady and unseen. You begin to move with life, not against it. When the ego no longer runs the show, life no longer feels like a battle. You stop dragging yourself through routines that numb you. You stop contorting your soul to fit into roles that shrink you. Instead, you live from the inside out. You speak your truth without apology. You set boundaries not as walls, but as sacred circles that protect your energy. You follow what resonates, not what impresses. And you begin to create, not to be seen, but because something inside you longs to be expressed. This is what it means to feel alive again, not because everything is perfect, but because everything is real. Your life may look simpler now, less curated, but it feels full. You find meaning in small things, a conversation that opens your heart, a walk that clears your mind, a morning where you wake up with peace instead of pressure. You are no longer living your life, you are living it. Jung believed that true freedom is not found in the absence of structure, but in the alignment of soul and action. This is the new direction you've been searching for. It is not a map written in rules, but a path written in resonance. When your choices emerge from authenticity, life begins to flow. The world around you may not change, but the way you meet it does. You bring presence where you once brought perfection. You bring clarity where you once brought control. So if you've walked through the fog, endured the collapse, faced the silence, and allowed the old self to fall away, know this: you are not lost. You are reawakening, and the life that is emerging now is not a return to who you were, but a deep homecoming to who you have always been beneath it all. This is not the end of your journey, it is the beginning of living soul first. And that, Jung would say, is the moment you finally become whole. If something within this message stirred you, if even a single word mirrored your inner experience, I invite you to let your voice be heard in the comments. Have you encountered that soul whose presence feels like home, or are you still walking the sacred path back to yourself? Your story, however unfinished, may become the lantern in someone else's darkness, the very sign they didn't know they were searching for. And if someone close to you is silently struggling with the illusion that love must hurt, that self-abandonment is the price of connection, or that they are unworthy of peace, share this video with them. Help me reach the ones who need to remember. Real love does not demand that we shrink. True connection does not ask for sacrifice of the soul. And the most vital union we will ever form is the one with our own inner truth. Before you go, I invite you to subscribe and activate the notification bell. Here, In this space, we journey beneath the surface of things, exploring the hidden architecture of the psyche, the whispers of the unconscious, and how every relationship is but a mirror reflecting our personal evolution. If there's a theme, a question, or a wound you would like us to explore in future videos, leave it below. This space breathes because of you. Your voice is not only welcome here, it is essential. Thank you for showing up, not just to this video but to your inner work, to the sacred labor of remembering who you truly are. And always remember this, when the right person appears, your soul will know, not through fear, but through peace. But until that moment, let your most intimate relationship be the one you cultivate within. That is the foundation, that is the home. And from that wholeness, all things real are born. Until next time, I'll see you on the path.